The Sega Dreamcast console was born of a company in trouble. Their various experiments through the years had failed, from the 32X add-on to their massive hit system, the Sega Genesis, to the follow-up CD-based system, the Sega Saturn. Nothing had ever hit quite right. This necessitated an absolute monster, and if you ask a fan looking back, that's exactly what the Sega Dreamcast was. It had a lineup of innovative, fun games with incredibly good graphics that people just hadn't seen an equivalent of at the time. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question, what killed the Sega Dreamcast? Here in the United States, Sega fans remember 9999 as not just a day where all of the numbers were the same, but the launch date for a real fun machine. From the Sonic titles, which, though kind of flawed, were also very fun, to weird, innovative titles like Jet Set Radio and Crazy Taxi, as well as the first Soul Calibur, which is a great fighting game for the time. Way back then, it was astounding. The graphics were incredible. It was amazing that this could run at home on your TV. It felt like the arcade. And Sega was consistently doing that, and that's why people liked Sega. They always did everything they could to bring the arcade into your living room. And if you know where things went, you should probably know that that's part of the problem. There wasn't really an arcade anymore. People didn't really go to arcades anymore. People weren't excited about having the arcade in their living room. They were excited about what living room gaming could be. When Tomb Raider hit half a decade earlier, people weren't thinking, wow, it's just like the arcade. One of the things they were thinking is how nice it was to sit on the couch and play a game that was at least better looking than anything they'd ever seen in the arcade. They weren't on a time limit. They could do whatever they want. They could take as long as they want and nobody would say, hey, you're hogging it, and essentially the market was changing. Sega was kind of a company that lived and died in the arcade, and when they brought it into the living room, it was a bonus. They started doing well because they were an arcade company that was making their games accessible to people in their homes. And suddenly, people were expecting more in-depth experiences, and while Sega was able to deliver that, they weren't really philosophically thinking, what can we do to be here in a few years? They were thinking, what can we do to continue what we are doing? And these are two fundamentally different questions. Yes, they did have a lineup of games like Sonic the Hedgehog, which were primarily enjoyed at home, but even those retained a lot of the arcade sensibilities with bonuses and high scores and time limits and all of that. It's just a mode of thinking that they could never shake, and I believe that it's fundamentally part of the problem. Now that's setting it up. Through the 1990s, Sega released twice as many video game systems as everyone else. The Sega Genesis, while the competitor to Super Nintendo, actually came in '88. Sega beat Nintendo to 16-bit by a lot, but instead of sort of hunkering down on that and working their butt off, in 1992 they released the Sega CD, an add-on that essentially allowed you to create games on a CD, which gave you the capacity that really nobody had thought of, and it was cool, and it allowed you to have CD quality music, but only a few people bought it. So they released another add-on in 1994 called the 32X. It was quite the powerhouse. Sony PlayStation was also a 32-bit system, so on paper, for a lot of people, it was supposedly as powerful. But at the same time, it was another add-on for a system you may not already have owned and you would have needed to buy. If you wanted to get into gaming with the 32X, which by the way, kind of had a crappy lineup of games on it, but if you did, you had to buy a Genesis and a 32X, which was a similar problem that the Sega CD had. And then literally 1 year later, they released the Sega Saturn, which was again a bit of a 2D powerhouse and was able to outperform the Sony PlayStation in many respects. However, 3D was the direction that video games were going in, and although Sega Saturn was indeed capable of that, it didn't do it as well as Sony PlayStation, and its programming architecture was pretty complex. To expand on the hardware issues, they also had a problem where they launched it early. They thought they were going to be able to compete with the PlayStation by launching it like 6 months early, without most of the games completed. It was a bad move, to say the least. This string of failures left Sega a bit in the hole, but it also created kind of an unstable brand recognition. People didn't really look at a Sega platform as a stable platform. They would wonder what exactly the next kooky thing they were going to add to it would be, and how long that would last. On top of that, over the years, they actually released a lot of very good games, but they were so fragmented in what platform platform they were on, the only way to have played all of them is to have bought all of their hardware. So in the lead up to the release of the Sega Dreamcast, there wasn't really a massive amount of, well, confidence. You had varying fan bases that were not all expecting the same thing from the next Sega system, if they were expecting another Sega system at all. They actually did wait a few years this time between the Sega Saturn in 1995 and the Dreamcast in 1999, but those 4 years were generally regarded as a drought. Not a lot of great games were released for the Sega Saturn, but once we started seeing screenshots from the Dreamcast start coming out, it was kind of like, well, this can't do anything like that. But it didn't exactly come quick, and well, by the time the launch happened, it was fairly lukewarm. During its entire lifespan, it sold 10.2 million units, which is not a lot. The PS2, its main competition, which came out simply 1 year after it, sold 155 million in its lifespan. By the year 2000, Sega had lost $400 million due to the Dreamcast, and the company itself was fundamentally questioning what on earth went on. Sadly, this led to them having to not support it very well. For about a year after launch, it was a great system with a ton of incredibly innovative and fun games, and then they just stopped. And here's the thing that really made it impossible to come back. That's pretty much what Sega was known for by this time. They were basically the false start company, and by this time they'd had so many false starts that they were in serious financial trouble. Because of this, they exited the console market full stop and became simply a software company. And some could say a lot of their habits never died. Sega has always been an incredibly creative company, but never been one that valued consistency. And because they spent an entire decade making sure that everyone thought that about them, the Dreamcast was always going to fail. It's sad because it's an awesome system with some of the most fun games that have ever been made, including one of my favorites to this day, Jet Set Radio, and one of the best fighting games I can remember, Power Stone, but it was just sadly attached to a company that had been mismanaged for a long time. And to this day, I do hope that they recapture the lightning in a bottle and start releasing games that good again. And on some level, I think the coming Sonic Mania kind of acknowledges a lot of the issues that they've gone through in a way that maybe says they kind of get it a little bit now, but we'll see. Sadly, there will never be a Dreamcast 2, but I don't know if it's even that important anymore. If Sega gets their crap together, doesn't even matter. I certainly miss the time when Sega released tons of great games, and now that they kind of have to release them for all platforms, if they just get back to it, I think a lot of people would play them. What do you think? Leave us a comment, and make sure you click like if you enjoyed this video. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is of course a subscription. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.